My son handed me a box of expensive cupcakes for my 58th birthday, bragging that he could finally treat me to the finer things in life. I smiled, recognizing the scent of vanilla bean immediately since I secretly own the company. But when my daughter-in-law swiped the gift to feed her online followers, claiming I was too frail for sugar, I decided it was time to collect the rent on the luxury life they were borrowing from me. My name is Eleanor Briggs, and at 58 years old, I have learned that the sharpest knives in a kitchen are rarely the ones made of steel. I stood over the granite island in the kitchen of the sprawling Denver apartment my son claimed to own, carefully arranging hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. The scent of rosemary and roasted chicken clung to my hands, a stark contrast to the expensive, chemical sweetness of the designer perfumes wafting in from the living room. Through the open archway, I watched Nolan, my 35-year-old son, holding court with a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked every inch the successful real estate attorney he claimed to be, his suit tailored to perfection, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who believed he had built his world from scratch. Beside him stood Harper, his wife, and a lifestyle influencer whose entire existence seemed curated for a lens. She laughed at something a guest said, her hand resting possessively on a piece of Italian furniture that I had technically paid for 3 years ago. The room was filled with their friends, a dozen upwardly mobile professionals discussing market volatility and the virtues of self-made success. I kept my head down, playing the part of the quiet mother from the South who was just grateful to have a roof over her head. "Mum, come out here for a second," Nolan called out, his voice thick with performative generosity. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the living room. The chatter died down as Nolan presented me with a large, heavy box tied with a satin ribbon. He beamed, looking around at his audience to ensure they were watching. "Happy birthday." "Mum?" Nolan announced loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I know you usually just get grocery store cupcakes, but I wanted to treat you properly this year. This is the Year of Desserts collection from Sugar Street Collective. It is a 12-month subscription to their highest tier." He placed the box in my hands. "Finally, I can afford to treat you like a queen. You deserve the best, even if you are used to, well, less." I looked down at the box. The logo was embossed in gold leaf against a heavy cream cardstock. I knew the weight of the paper because I had approved the packaging budget myself 6 months ago. I knew the scent of the Madagascar vanilla rising from the box because I had signed the exclusive import contract for those beans. Sugar Street Collective was the company I secretly held the controlling interest in, a fact buried under layers of trusts and shell companies. But to my son, I was just his simple mother. "Oh, Nolan," I said, forcing a wobble into my voice. "This is too much. Thank you, honey." I retreated to the kitchen to set the box down, intending to serve the appetizers. Harper followed me in a moment later, the smile on her face not quite reaching her cold eyes. She touched my arm with a pitying softness. "Eleanor, sweetie." She purred, lowering her voice. That was such a lovely gesture from Nolan. But, are you really going to eat those? You know what the doctor said about your cholesterol? At your age, sugar is basically poison. She ran a manicured finger over the box. It would be a shame to let Nolan's hard-earned money go to waste. "Why don't you let me take these? I can use them for my unboxing content tonight. It helps the brand deals, which helps pay for, well, everything here." I looked at her, then at the box. I had given up my youth, my sleep, and my health to build the empire inside that box. Giving up the physical cake was nothing. You are right, Harper, I said softly. You take them. I do not need the sugar. Harper beamed, snatched the box, and breezed back into the living room. I turned back to the oven, but a sudden silence in the other room made me freeze. Then came Nolan's voice, sharp and angry. Harper, why do you have Mum's gift? I walked to the doorway. Harper was holding the box, looking wide-eyed and innocent. Oh, Nolan, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Your mum gave it to me. She said she didn't want it. I just didn't want it to go to waste. Nolan turned to me, his face flushing red. The guests watched, their drinks suspended halfway to their mouths. You gave it away, Nolan demanded, walking toward me. I spent hundreds of dollars on that. Mum, do you have any idea how hard I work to provide these nice things for you, and you just toss it aside? I didn't mean to offend you. Son? I started, but he cut me off. It is not about offense. Mum, it is about respect. He gestured wildly around the room. I let you live here rent-free. I buy you premium food, and you treat my gifts like trash. Harper is trying to build a business, and you are just existing here. Nolan, please, Harper interjected, adding fuel to the fire with her fake defense. Don't be too hard on her. I'm sure she didn't understand the value. Old people get confused. She understands fine. Nolan snapped. He glared at me with a look of pure disdain. If you cannot respect the financial discipline of this family and the gifts I give you, maybe you should stop acting like a guest and start acting like a tenant. Maybe you should start paying market rent for this room. Or better yet, find somewhere else to live if this isn't good enough for you. The room was dead silent. My son, standing on the hardwood floor I bought, wearing a suit paid for by the education I funded, had just threatened to evict me for giving away his gift. I looked him in the eye. I did not blink. I did not cry. I will remember your words, I said, my voice steady and cold. I turned around, walked past the steaming dinner I had spent 3 hours cooking, and walked out the back door. I sat on the edge of the narrow guest bed, the raucous laughter from the living room drifting down the hallway like toxic smoke. I stared into the cracked vanity mirror I had brought with me from my old life, tracing the deep lines around my eyes. To the people in the other room, these were just signs of an aging woman who had let herself go. But I knew the truth. They were roadmaps of a life spent scraping the bottom of the barrel so my son could skim the cream off the top. The woman in the glass was not Eleanor Briggs, the silent millionaire. She was still the 20-year-old waitress from a dust-choked town in Alabama, smelling of fryer grease and desperation. I closed my eyes and saw Caleb again. My husband was a truck driver with a laugh that shook the walls and hands rough enough to sand wood. He died on a slick patch of highway when Nolan was just an infant, leaving me with nothing but a mountain of debt and a funeral I had to beg the community to help pay for. I will figure it out. I had whispered to his grave while clutching a crying baby. I promise. I clawed my way into a job as a filing clerk at Harborline Community Trust. It was a small, unglamorous financial firm, but it became my university. While the bankers drank 3 martini lunches, I studied the files in the archives. I learned a simple truth that the market trends confirmed again and again: tech stocks crash and fashion fades. But people always need a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. Real estate and food. Those were the anchors that did not starve. Then came Lila. She was a genius with dough, but a disaster with numbers. We pooled our savings, my meagre tips, and her grandmother's inheritance to open a tiny bakery. That was the birth of Sugar Street Collective. Lila was the warm smile out front. I was the steel spine in the back office. I lived in a basement apartment with damp walls that made my lungs ache. For 5 years, I ate instant noodles for dinner every single night, so I could afford to buy premium butter for the croissants. I remembered nights spent sleeping on a folding chair next to the industrial ovens, rocking Nolan's car seat with one foot while I balanced ledgers with the other hand. When the business eventually exploded into a national brand, Lila wanted to retire to a condo in Florida. I bought her out quietly. I became the majority shareholder, the invisible hand guiding the empire. But I let a board of directors take the public face. I stayed in the shadows, maintaining the charade that I was just a low-level accountant. It was almost funny. The luxury apartment Nolan was currently standing in, bragging about his negotiation skills to his wealthy friends, actually belonged to me. He told everyone he snagged a once-in-a-lifetime lease because of his brilliant legal prowess. He did not know that the landlord, a company called Briggs Haven Holdings, was just a shell company I created. I signed his lease. I approved his below-market rent. I remembered the day he got into law school. The tuition was astronomical. I wrote the check without blinking, but I handed it to him with a calculated lie. This is a special low-interest loan from a scholarship fund at my work. Nolan, I had told him, keeping my face stern. It is not free money. You have to earn it with your grades. I did it because I was terrified. I had seen what easy money did to the children of the wealthy clients at Harborline. They became soft, rot-filled fruit that bruised at the slightest touch. I wanted Nolan to have grit. I wanted him to respect the dollar. I thought I was building his character by hiding the safety net. I looked at the closed door of the bedroom, listening to the man who had just threatened to evict me from my own property. I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that my plan had backfired. I had not taught him to value money. I had only taught him to despise poverty. And to him, I was just poverty personified. I locked the bedroom door, the solid click of the deadbolt severing the connection between my sanctuary and the circus outside. I knelt on the plush carpet and reached under the heavy oak wardrobe, pulling out a small, fireproof safe. My fingers, still smelling faintly of the roasted garlic I had chopped for a dinner no one ate, spun the dial. The mechanism tumbled open with a heavy thud. Inside lay the paper trail of my life, the physical proof of everything I had built and hidden. I pulled out the leather binder and flipped it open. The first page was the stock certificate for Sugar Street Collective, showing my name as the majority shareholder. Behind it lay the deed to this very building. The brick-and-mortar structure Nolan believed was owned by a nameless conglomerate. I pulled out the lease agreement Nolan had signed 3 years ago. I ran my finger over the landlord line, Briggs Haven Holdings, LLC. It sounded corporate and distant, exactly as I had intended. He had no idea that Briggs was his own last name, or that the Haven was the safety I had tried to build for him. I stood up and walked to the window, which offered a view of the terrace where Nolan had taken his guests to smoke cigars. The glass was thick, but the window was cracked open just enough for his voice to drift in. Bonuses were up 20% this quarter, Nolan was saying, gesturing with a lit cigar. But you know how it is. Nobody gives you anything for free in this world. You have to take it. I gripped the lease agreement until the paper crinkled. He was standing on a terrace paid for by the night shifts I worked, while he was sleeping in a crib next to a commercial mixer. He was drinking scotch, bought with the profits of the company he thought he was too good for. My eyes shifted to the stack of bank statements I had pulled from the safe. I thought about the supplementary credit card I had given Harper 2 years ago. I had told her it was for emergencies, imagining medical bills or a flat tire. Instead, the statements told a story of excess. $3,000 for a leather jacket, $2,000 for a weekend retreat to review a resort. Every month. I paid the bill in silence, convincing myself that keeping the peace was worth the price. But the real sting came from the folded email printout I had received just yesterday from my internal audit team. I smoothed it out on the vanity table. It was a preliminary report on a charity called Bright Hearts Kids Kitchen. Harper had been partnering with them for months, using the Sugar Street brand to solicit donations from her followers. The report was damning. The charity was a ghost. The funds were not buying meals for underprivileged children. They were funneling directly into a shell account that traced back to Harper's personal consulting firm. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Harper did not want the birthday cake box because she was hungry. She did not even want it just for content. She needed it as a prop to prove to her followers that Sugar Street was an active sponsor, legitimizing her fraudulent fundraising. She was using the company I built with my blood and sweat to steal from good-hearted people. The humiliation of the last hour began to curdle into something colder and more dangerous. My son had humiliated me publicly, threatening to evict me from my own property because I did not fit his aesthetic. He demanded I pay rent while he lived on my charity. And his wife was turning my life's work into a tool for theft. I looked at my reflection in the mirror again. The hurt mother was gone. In her place stood the woman who had negotiated lease terms with sharks and cutthroat suppliers for 30 years. I realized I had made a mistake by trying to protect Nolan from the harshness of the world. By shielding him, I had created a man who thought he was a giant because he was standing on my shoulders. I placed the documents back into the safe, but I left the lease agreement and the fraud report on the table. I would not go back out there and scream. I would not cry or beg for an apology. I was done explaining myself to people who refused to listen. I decided right then that I would let the paperwork do the talking. I would let the contracts, the deeds, and the inevitable financial collapse explain exactly who I was. If Nolan wanted to learn about financial discipline, I would give him a masterclass he would never forget. The conference room at Northlake Legal Group was a fortress of mahogany and silence, a fitting place to dismantle a life. I sat across from Mariah Lopez, my attorney for the past 15 years. She was one of the few people in Denver who knew that the woman in the sensible shoes and off-the-rack cardigan was actually the heavy lifter behind Sugar Street Collective. I laid the lease agreement and the fraud report on the polished table between us. I need to restructure everything. Mariah, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I want to create a new vehicle. Let us call it the Magnolia Trust. Mariah adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the documents. And the beneficiaries? Just me. I replied. For now. I want all my shares in Sugar Street, the deed to the apartment building, and my investment portfolios transferred into the trust. Add a clause that locks Nolan out completely for at least 5 years. He cannot access a single penny unless he meets specific conditions regarding gainful employment and community service. Mariah looked up, raising an eyebrow. This is a nuclear option. Eleanor, you are essentially cutting him off from his inheritance while you are still alive. He is already spending it like I am dead. I said. Next item. I need you to draft a lease termination notice for the penthouse unit at the Briggs building. Cite a change of usage for the property. Give them 60 days to vacate. It needs to be completely legal, ironclad, and delivered by a process server. 60 days, Mariah repeated, jotting down notes. Okay, that is standard. But you know this will start a war. The war started last night over a box of cupcakes, I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jonah Reed, the CEO I had installed at Sugar Street. He picked up on the second ring. Jonah. It is Eleanor. I said, I need you to pull the plug on all marketing collaborations with Harper Briggs. Immediately. Cite a strategic pivot if she asks. And Jonah, I want a forensic audit on the Bright Hearts Kids Kitchen charity she is promoting. I suspect our brand is being used to launder donations. Eleanor. That is your daughter-in-law. Jonah stammered. Do it? I commanded. Then hung up. Next came the bank. I logged into the portal for the family credit cards. With 2 clicks. I cancelled Harper's supplementary card. For Nolan's card, I did not cancel it. That would be too merciful. Instead, I lowered his limit to $500, just enough to buy gas and groceries, but not enough to pick up the tab for a client dinner. I drafted a short email to him. I need to control my monthly expenses. I hope you understand. I hit send, letting the lie sit there like a trap. Later that afternoon, I met with my financial advisor at Silverleaf Advisory. I instructed him to liquidate one of my older commercial properties. I want the capital ready. I explained. I am buying that old warehouse in East Denver. We are going to turn it into a community kitchen and a training center for single mothers. Free of charge. Back in Mariah's office, the mood grew heavier as we discussed the fraud report. Mariah looked at me with genuine concern. Eleanor, you need to understand the collateral damage here, she warned, tapping the file on the fake charity. If Harper is funneling money and Nolan's law firm signed off on the paperwork, even if he did not know, he could be disbarred for negligence. If we expose this, you might destroy his career. I stared out the window at the Denver skyline. I thought about the single mothers I wanted to help, the ones who would never see a dime of the money Harper was stealing. Then I thought about Nolan, bragging about his bonus while standing on my floorboards. I shielded him from the rain his whole life. Mariah, I said softly, and because of that, he never learned how to build a shelter. If I cover for him now, I am an accomplice to theft. I have to protect the people who donated, even if it hurts him. So, what is the endgame? Mariah asked. The endgame is a choice, I said. Standing up to leave? He is going to lose the apartment. He is going to lose the credit cards. He is going to find out his wife is a fraud. When he hits the bottom, he will have to decide. Does he stand with the liar because it is easy? Or does he stand with the truth and lose everything I buttoned my coat? And once he decides, I will decide if he is still my son. I sat in the small kitchenette of the extended stay motel I had checked into, sipping lukewarm tea on my laptop screen. The tracking software showed that the email from Briggs Haven Holdings, LLC, had been opened at 9 a.m. I did not need to be in the room to know that the first domino had just tipped over. Nolan stared at his computer screen in his glass-walled office, the color draining from his face. The subject line read, Notice of Lease Termination, Change of Property Usage. This has to be a mistake, Nolan muttered, reaching for his office phone. He dialed the number listed on the letterhead for the landlord, a number he had never actually called because he always assumed he had a direct line through his mother. A cool, robotic voice answered. Thank you for calling Briggs Haven Holdings. All agents are currently busy. Please leave a message. I do not leave messages. Nolan snapped at the empty air. I am the tenant. I know the owner. He did not know the owner. He only knew the ghost I had let him believe in. Across town, Harper was in the middle of her sanctuary, the ring-lit corner of the living room. She held up the box of Sugar Street cupcakes, smiling that practiced, wide smile that never reached her eyes. Hey guys, today we are unboxing the exclusive Year of Desserts collection. Harper chirped to her camera phone. I am so obsessed with these. A notification banner dropped down from the top of her screen. It was an email from the Sugar Street marketing team. Contract termination. Effective immediately due to strategic realignment. Her smile faltered. She cut the live stream and threw the phone onto the sofa. Are you kidding me? She shrieked. Strategic realignment. That woman. She must have called them. She is so petty. That evening, the humiliation moved from the digital world to the physical one. Nolan sat at Le Monde, a restaurant where the steaks cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to be. He was trying to close a deal with a new client. When the waiter brought the black leather folder, Nolan placed his platinum card inside with a casual flick of his wrist. 3 minutes later, the waiter returned, holding the card with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. I am sorry, sir, the waiter said softly. The card was declined. That is impossible. Nolan laughed nervously, feeling the client's eyes on him. It has a $50,000 limit. Run it again. We did, sir. The bank says the limit is exceeded. Do you have another form of payment? Nolan patted his pockets, sweating. He did not know that I had capped the card at $500 that morning. He ended up letting the client pay, muttering about banking glitches. The next morning, the ground beneath Nolan truly began to crack. He was summoned to the managing partner's office. His boss, a man with eyes like a hawk, tossed a file onto the desk. We are being audited. Nolan, the boss said. The state is looking into a charity called Bright Hearts Kids Kitchen. Apparently, our firm handled the incorporation paperwork. Your signature is on the compliance documents. It is just a small project my wife is helping with, Nolan said, his voice trembling. It is a shell. Nolan, the boss, roared. The bank froze their accounts this morning because of suspicious activity. I need every single email you exchanged with your wife regarding this matter. If you didn't vet this properly, I cannot protect you. Back at the apartment, the air was thick with panic. Boxes were already being pulled out, not by movers, but by a frantic Harper. You said this was a sure thing, Harper yelled, throwing a designer cushion onto the floor. You told me you negotiated this lease. You said the landlord loved us. Now we have 60 days to get out. Where are we supposed to go? My parents live in Arizona. I am trying to fix it. Nolan shouted back, loosening his tie as if it were choking him. I have been calling Mom all day. She is not picking up. He tried again, putting the phone on speaker. It went straight to voicemail. Then, a text message arrived from my number. Please direct all future communication regarding the tenancy to the legal counsel listed on the notice. I cannot discuss business matters personally. She is treating me like a stranger, Nolan whispered, staring at the phone. It is like I am talking to a corporation. Desperation makes people do foolish things. Harper took to her social media, posting a black and white photo of herself looking tearful. The caption read, Sometimes the toxic people in your life are the ones who are supposed to protect you. Being sabotaged by family is a different kind of pain. She thought she was gaining sympathy. She did not realize she was lighting a flare that would lead the investigators right to her. By the end of the week, the illusion of their life had evaporated. The leased SUV was returned to the dealership because the company credit check failed. Their friends, the ones who drank my wine and ate my food, stopped returning texts the moment the rumor of a fraud investigation started circulating. I sat in my motel room, watching the sun set over the city. I was not happy. Revenge is not sweet. It is heavy work. But as I thought about the fake charity and the stolen donations, I knew I had to keep pushing until the entire house of cards was flat against the ground. The reality of Nolan's new life smelled like boiled cabbage and stale tobacco. He stood in the center of a one-bedroom apartment in a complex called The View, which was an ironic name, considering the only view was a brick wall and a dumpster overflowing with cardboard. The carpet was a suspicious shade of brown, sticky under his polished loafers, and the walls were thin enough that he could hear the neighbor's television blasting a game show. It was a violent shift from the floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops he had lost, a drop so steep it made his ears pop. Harper had taken one look at the place, her nose wrinkling as if she had smelled a gas leak. "I cannot live here." "Nolan," she had said, clutching her designer purse to her chest. "My brand is about aspiration. If I post a story from a kitchen with laminate counters, I will lose followers by the hour. I am going to stay with my parents in Arizona for a while. Just until you stabilize things." "You are leaving me?" Nolan had asked, his voice cracking. "Now I am protecting our future," she had replied, backing toward the door. "When you get your license back, and when we get the apartment back, call me." She left him standing in the hallway, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than the boxes he had to carry. For the first time in his adult life, Nolan moved his own furniture. He rented a U-Haul truck, sweating through his dress shirt as he hauled boxes up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. A vague, uncomfortable memory pricked at the back of his mind, a memory of his mother, decades ago, taping up boxes in the middle of the night, moving them from one basement apartment to another. He shoved the memory down. He did not want to think about her strength. He wanted to wallow in his own injustice. His professional life had disintegrated just as quickly. When he walked into the firm that Monday, the silence was deafening. Colleagues who used to invite him for golf suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating. The managing partner met him at the door, handing him a letter. Administrative leave, pending the investigation, the partner said, not meeting Nolan's eyes. "If the Bar Association finds that you knowingly facilitated fraud for that charity, Nolan, we will have to cut you loose completely." That night, in the cramped kitchen of his new apartment, Nolan instinctively reached for the cabinet where he used to keep his 18-year-old scotch. His hand hit empty air. He remembered he couldn't afford to replace his collection. His stomach growled, a hollow, angry sound. He opened the pantry and stared at the only thing he had bought because it was on sale, a styrofoam cup of instant noodles. He boiled water in a pot that still had a price sticker on it. As he ate the salty, limp noodles, the humiliation burned his throat. He used to mock his mother for hoarding coupons for this exact meal. Now, it was his dinner, needing a distraction. He began unpacking a box his mother had asked him to store years ago. It was an old shoebox taped shut with layers of masking tape. He ripped it open, expecting old photos. Instead, he found a stack of envelopes. He pulled one out. Tuition, Semester 1. Textbooks, Year 3. Nolan frowned. He opened the envelopes. Inside were bank transfer receipts, not from a scholarship fund, but from a personal account. He looked at the dates. Every time he had applied for a loan from the Harbour Line scholarship, a transfer had been made the very next day from an account named Eleanor Briggs, Private Holdings. His hands started to shake. He grabbed his coat and drove to the bank branch listed on the receipts. He marched up to the teller, slamming the old receipt on the counter. "I need to know about this account," Nolan demanded, his desperation making him reckless. "It is my mother's. I need to know the source of funds." The teller looked at him, then typed the account number into her computer. Her eyes widened slightly. She looked at the screen, then back at Nolan, her demeanor instantly shifting to deferential. "Sir, this is a high-wealth custodial account," she said quietly. "The balance is substantial. But since you are not a signatory, I cannot give you the exact figures or transaction history." "High wealth," Nolan whispered. "Like 100,000. The teller hesitated, then gave a small, pitying shake of her head. "Significantly more, sir. It is an investment-grade portfolio." Nolan walked out of the bank, the world tilting on its axis. He sat in his car, his mind racing, connecting dots he had been too arrogant to see. The gift of the cupcakes from Sugar Street, Harper's frantic need for the box, the lease termination from Briggs Haven Holdings, the way his mother always knew exactly which clause in a contract to quote. She wasn't just a frugal old woman pinching pennies. She was the bank. She was the landlord. She was the entire system he thought he had conquered. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He thought back to the birthday party, to the way he had screamed at her, calling her a freeloader, threatening to kick her out of a building she owned. Oh my God. Nolan breathed, covering his face with his hands. I did not just insult my mother. I declared war on the boss. The air in the private conference room of Sugar Street Collective was colder than the refrigeration units in our warehouse. I sat at the head of the table, my hands clasped tightly over a leather folder. Jonah Reed, the young CEO I had handpicked to run the day-to-day operations, looked pale as he projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. "It is worse than we thought." "Eleanor," Jonah said, his voice tight with stress. "Brightheart's kids. Kitchen is barely a legal entity. It is a funnel. 80% of the donations raised through our co-branding campaigns are being routed directly into a consulting firm registered in Nevada. The sole signatory for that firm is Harper Briggs." I stared at the numbers. My daughter-in-law was not just greedy, she was a criminal. She was stealing from people who thought they were feeding hungry children, and she was using the reputation I had spent 30 years building to do it. "And there is more," Jonah continued, clicking to the next slide. "We received an inquiry this morning from an investigative journalist at the Denver Post. They have the tax filings. They are asking why Sugar Street is partnering with a fraudulent charity. They gave us 48 hours to comment before they run the story." My stomach churned. If this story broke without our control, Sugar Street would be painted as an accomplice. The scandal would not only destroy the brand, but also kill the Magnolia Kitchen project before I even laid the first brick. My plan to build a free culinary school for single mothers, my way of paying back the universe for the luck I had, would die, because Harper needed another designer handbag. I left the office and drove straight to Mariah. She read the journalist's email and took off her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "You have to get ahead of this." "Eleanor," Mariah said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. We need to file a proactive report with the State Attorney General. We need to hand over everything we have on Harper to prove Sugar Street was duped. And Nolan? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mariah sighed. Nolan's firm handled the incorporation paperwork for Bright Hearts. His signature is on the compliance checks. If we hand over the file, we are handing over proof of his professional negligence. Best case scenario. He gets suspended. Worst case. He faces criminal charges for aiding fraud. I looked out the window. I remembered being 25 years old, working as a junior bookkeeper. I had caught my boyfriend at the time skimming petty cash. I had covered for him, thinking I was being loyal. When the owners found out, they fired me, not him. I learned then that silence is just a slower form of suicide. I cannot protect him from this. I whispered, if I stay silent, I am helping them steal. I am destroying the future of every woman I want to help with the new kitchen. So, what do you want to do? Mariah asked softly. I pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag. It contained the forensic audit, the emails, and the undeniable proof of Harper's theft and Nolan's blindness. Send it, I said, my voice cracking. Send it to the Financial Crimes Division. Anonymous source. Do not leave anything out. It felt like I was signing an execution order for my son's career. I walked out of her office feeling hollowed out, to keep my mind from eating itself alive. I drove to the industrial district in East Denver. I met with a contractor at an old, abandoned warehouse. The windows were broken, and the floor was covered in dust. But the structure was solid. We can put the industrial ovens along the south wall, the contractor said, pointing with a roll of blueprints. It will cost about $40,000 to redo the ventilation. Do it, I said, signing the work order. I focused on the scratch of the pen against the paper. I tried to focus on the mothers who would learn a trade here. I tried not to think about the fact that I was building this sanctuary with one hand while dismantling my son's life with the other. That night, the silence in my house was deafening. I sat in the living room with a glass of water, staring at my phone. I opened my saved voicemails and scrolled back 3 years. I pressed play. Mum, I passed the bar exam. Nolan's voice rang out, young and breathless with hope. I did it. I promise. I am going to make you so proud, you will see. I am going to be the best. Tears finally pricked my eyes. I wondered if I was breaking that promise or forcing him to finally keep it. I turned on the television to drown out the sound of his ghost. The local news anchor looked grave. Breaking news tonight, the reporter said. The State Attorney General has launched an investigation into a prominent local charity, alleged to be a front for money laundering. Sources say subpoenas are being issued to a well-known lifestyle influencer and a prestigious downtown law firm. I turned the TV off. The storm had made landfall. Nolan sat in his sedan, the engine idling in the parking lot of a grim industrial park on the edge of town. On the passenger seat lay the discovery file his lawyer had managed to obtain from the ethics committee. It was thick, heavy, and damning. As he had flipped through the pages, sweat had slicked his palms. The details were too specific. The dates of the wire transfers, the internal memos from Sugar Street, the exact clauses in the lease agreement. It was information that only an insider could possess. But it was the signatures that made his breath hitch. On the deed to his penthouse Eleanor Briggs, on the incorporation papers for the trust funding his education Eleanor Briggs, on the majority shareholder disclosure for Sugar Street Collective Eleanor Briggs. He looked up at the brick building in front of him. A fresh hand-painted sign hung above the entrance Magnolia Community Projects. He got out of the car and walked to the large front window. Through the glass, he saw a woman standing over a drafting table covered in blueprints. She was wearing a sharp navy blazer he had never seen, her hair pulled back in a severe, efficient bun. She was pointing at a document, giving orders to a burly contractor who was nodding respectfully. There was no hesitation in her posture, no softness. She looked like a CEO. She looked like a stranger. Nolan pushed the door open, the bell chiming violently. I looked up from the blueprints as the door slammed against the wall. Nolan stood there, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. He looked at me, then at the contractor, then back at me. It was you. Nolan spat, his voice shaking. You are the source. You sent the file to the investigator. I didn't flinch. I turned to the contractor. Mike, give us a moment, please. Mike, close the door on your way out. Mike nodded and slipped out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. I took off my reading glasses and folded them on the table. Hello. Nolan, I said calmly. Do not hello me, he shouted, stepping further into the room. I read the file. Mum, or should I call you the landlord? You own the building. You own the bakery company. You have been sitting on a mountain of gold while watching me struggle to pay for everything I watched you struggle to pay for nothing. I corrected him, my voice dropping an octave. I watched you live in a subsidized reality that I built for you. You destroyed me, he screamed, slamming his hand on the table. You gathered evidence against your own son. You threw me to the wolves to protect what this. He gestured around the unfinished warehouse. You needed a sacrificial lamb so you could play saint with your charity project. I protected the company, I said, stepping around the table to face him. I am the majority shareholder of Sugar Street Collective. I am the president of the Magnolia Trust. And yes, I am the landlord who evicted you. I did not send that file to hurt you. I sent it because you were helping your wife steal from my company. I didn't know, Nolan pleaded, but the anger was still there, hot and defensive. I just signed the papers. I trusted her. You signed because you are lazy. Nolan. I cut him off. You signed because you liked the lifestyle she provided, and you did not want to ask where the money came from. You remember what you told me at my birthday dinner. You stood in my living room and told me that nobody gives you anything for free. You told me I needed to learn financial discipline. I took a step closer to him. So tell me, Nolan, what have you ever given to anyone that cost you something real? I gave you plenty, he retorted, his face flushing red. I took care of you. That birthday gift, that dessert subscription. That was the premium package. Mom, you spent $12.50. I said. Nolan froze. What, the year of desserts collection? I said, holding his gaze. It was an internal PR package for shareholders and VIPs. Harper requested it through her contact at marketing. I saw the invoice. I approved the write-off myself. You paid for the shipping. Nolan. That is it. You stood there and bragged about treating me to the finer things, and you did not even pay for the flour. The color drained from his face completely. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The image of the generous, successful son, the one thing he had clung to while his career fell apart, was stripped away. He was just a man who had re-gifted his mother's own hard work back to her. He slumped against the wall, looking suddenly small. But then, the defense mechanism kicked in. The arrogance resurfaced, desperate and ugly. "Well, why didn't you tell me?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "If I had known. If I had known you were the one with the money. If I had known you were the boss. I would have treated you differently." The words hung in the air between us, toxic and revealing. "I know," I said softly. "And that is exactly why you do not deserve a penny of it." Nolan walked out of the Magnolia office and into the grey, relentless rain of the Denver afternoon. He did not go back to his car. Instead, he walked until the pavement turned cracked and uneven, finding himself in the neighborhood where we had lived when he was 7. He stood on the corner, water dripping from his ruined suit, staring at the laundromat where I used to fold sheets for extra cash while he did his homework on top of a vibrating dryer. For the first time, he did not see the poverty as a failure. He saw it as the price I had paid for his ticket out. That night, in his cramped apartment, Nolan sat in front of his laptop. He typed out a furious, weeping confession. He wrote about his shame, his blindness, and how he had let Harper steer him into the grey zones of morality because he liked the way the light hit her diamonds. He typed for an hour, pouring his soul onto the screen. Then, his finger hovered over the send button. He stared at it, his hand trembling, before he highlighted the entire text and pressed delete. He was not ready. Words were cheap, and he had spent too many of them already. Instead, he went to see his grandmother, Caleb's mother. She was 80 years old, and the only person I allowed to call me Ellie. She made him tea and told him the stories I had forbidden her to share. She mortgaged the house to pay for my heart surgery. "Nolan," his grandmother told him, her voice thin but sharp. And when that business magazine wanted to put her on the cover 10 years ago, she told them to go to hell. She said, "If my son sees me as a tycoon, he will stop seeing me as a mother. I want him to make his own way." The memories hit Nolan like physical blows. He remembered the nights I fell asleep at the kitchen table, my face pressed against a stack of invoices. He remembered the winter I wore a denim jacket with 3 layers of sweaters underneath because I had spent the coat money on his LSAT prep course fees. He had thought I was just eccentric. Now he knew I was freezing so he could burn bright. While he was piecing together the past, I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom with an old tin box. It was not a safe. It was just a biscuit tin. Inside were the receipts of my life. The bank loan for his first car. The photo of me working the night shift at the diner, smiling despite the exhaustion. I ran my thumb over the edges of the photos. I asked myself the question that had been haunting me for weeks. Was I being a mother teaching a hard lesson? Or was I becoming the kind of tyrant I had spent my life hating? Was I breaking his legs just to show him how to walk? The answer came in the form of a process server. We both received subpoenas for a hearing before the ethics committee. I was called as a key witness regarding the fraudulent financial structures of the charity. I knew that my testimony would likely strip Nolan of his license to practice law. Nolan had a choice. He could have stayed silent. He could have blamed Harper entirely. But he did something that made me pause. He went to the investigators voluntarily. I was negligent, he told the stern-faced agents, his voice quiet but steady. I trusted the wrong people, and I signed documents I should have scrutinized. I am responsible for my lack of due diligence. Harper did not share his sudden growth of conscience. When the investigators knocked on her door, she pointed a manicured finger straight at Nolan. "He is the lawyer," she screamed. According to the police report I saw later, he told me it was legal. He set it up. If you drag me down, Nolan, if you drag me down, I will put your whole family history on the internet. I will ruin the Briggs name. On the morning of the hearing, I sat in the waiting room, my hands cold. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Nolan. It was not the long, rambling apology he had written before. It was short. Mum, you do not owe me an explanation. If you have to tell the truth today and I get punished, I will accept it. I know I earned this. I just hope that after this is all over, I still have the right to call you Mom. I stared at the screen, and for the first time since my birthday, the ice in my chest began to crack. He had finally stopped trying to negotiate his way out of the consequences. He was ready to pay the bill. The hearing room was smaller than I expected, a windowless box that smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. I sat across from Nolan, who looked like a man made of glass that had already shattered. Beside him sat his lawyer, a young woman who kept tapping her pen against her notepad. Across the table were the members of the Ethics Committee and 3 representatives of the families who had donated to the fraudulent charity, their faces tight with a justified anger. The silence in the room was so heavy I could hear the rustle of a page turning 3 seats away. Mrs. Briggs, the committee chair said, his voice dry. Please state for the record what you discovered regarding the financial irregularities. I took a breath. I did not look at Nolan. I looked at the victims. I discovered that 80% of the funds raised for Bright Hearts Kids Kitchen were diverted to a private consulting firm owned by Harper Briggs. I stated clearly. I discovered that the legal framework allowing this diversion was drafted by the North Lake Legal Group, specifically by Nolan Briggs. A gasp rippled through the small audience. Every detail I gave was a surgical cut. I spoke of the blind signatures, the lack of due diligence, and the willful ignorance. I did not sugarcoat it. I did not make excuses for him. I laid out the anatomy of the crime just as clearly as I would lay out the ingredients for a sponge cake. However, I added, raising my voice slightly before they could move on, I must also state for the record that Nolan Briggs was the one who provided the initial email correspondence to the investigators. He turned himself in before the subpoena was issued. The chair looked at me over his spectacles. Mrs. Briggs, do you view your son as a victim of his wife's manipulation, or as an accomplice to her fraud? The room seemed to hold its breath. I looked at Nolan then. He was staring at his hands, waiting for the final blow. I view him as the result of his own bad choices, I said slowly, and of mine, for sheltering him for too long. The committee began to murmur about disbarment. That was the standard procedure. Permanent removal. The end of his career. I have a proposal. I interrupted, pulling a document from my bag. Instead of stripping his license permanently, which would serve no one, I propose a restorative sentence. My organization, Magnolia Community Projects, requires legal counsel for the indigent families we serve. We cannot afford to pay for it. I looked directly at the chair. Suspend him. Do not disbar him. Make him earn his way back. I propose a suspension of his license for a period of time, contingent on him completing a mandatory number of pro bono legal hours for Magnolia and other verified non-profits. The committee debated for 40 minutes. Through the frosted glass of the conference room, I watched them argue. Some shook their heads, others pointed at Nolan's confession file. Finally, they returned. Nolan Briggs. The chair announced, due to your cooperation and the testimony of the witness, We are suspending your license to practice law for 18 months. During this period, and for the year and a half following your reinstatement, you are required to perform a minimum of 800 hours of pro bono legal service under strict supervision. Any violation will result in permanent disbarment. It was a heavy sentence, but it was a lifeline. 10 minutes later, I found Nolan standing in the parking lot. He looked unmoored, staring at the grey concrete as if expecting it to open up and swallow him. He had lost his job, his luxury apartment, his wife, and his reputation. But he was still standing. I walked over to him, holding a small brown box. "Here," I said, extending it to him. He took it with trembling hands and opened the lid. Inside sat a single, simple vanilla cupcake from Sugar Street. No gold leaf, no fancy packaging, just a small cake with one unlit candle stuck in the center. "My birthday was weeks ago," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "On my birthday," I said, looking him in the eye. "I let my son give me a gift that cost him nothing. He gave it to me to make himself feel big. Today, I am giving you a gift that you have started to pay for with your own life. This is a new beginning." I struck a match and held it to the wick. The tiny flame flickered in the wind, casting a warm glow on his tired face. Nolan stared at the flame. He did not blow it out immediately. I don't know what to wish for," he stammered, tears finally spilling over. I wish that in 18 months, you will still let me stand next to you in that kitchen." "That depends entirely on how you work from this moment forward," I said. I reached out and broke the cupcake in half. I took one side, and he took the other. We ate in silence there in the parking lot, the cake tasting sweet, with just a hint of the bitter char from the burnt wick. It was the first honest meal we had shared in years. Thanks so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So drop your city or country in the comments below to connect with each other. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so more people can hear this story.